look at it from a Dharmic perspective of practitioner of constitutional law, I would say that my world as a Dharmic Bharatiya Drishti makes it inclusive and not exclusive, because that's the core of a Bharatiya insight or a view, worldview, as contrasted with a Western binary worldview of us and others. So when I approach the constitution that we the people have given to ourselves in 1950, my endeavor has always been to look at it from a perspective of ownership of the document from an Indic perspective itself, and not as an alien document imposed on us. When I say that, am I the lone voice? I think not so. In fact, in the leading judgment of the Supreme Court, which sets out the contours of separation of powers and the constitutional supremacy, the Keswananda Bharati judgment itself, views have been expressed in different opinions, where they talk about the Indian constitution is something which has to be interpreted in its own context and not with reference to an American constitution or any other constitution. As I said, we as an inclusive worldview perspective, various parts of the constitution could have been and probably have been inspired or by the times of the when the Constituent Assembly was debating, and what inspired them could have been the French Revolution or the other experiences of the European nations. So I think that may per se not be a reason to actually throw the baby with the bathwater. If we can find some value in it, I think for us, knowledge is welcome from all sources. For us, knowledge is something which is to be acquired at all times, and learning is a lifelong journey. Because we are a culture or a civilization of seekers. Because our pursuit of unraveling the satya or the truth, and we are, I think, the only civilization which has actually evolved very detailed techniques to which we are not formally trained in the legal profession, unfortunately, in our country, of debate. And the science of debate has evolved not for any materialistic court appearances or conferences of lawyers, but actually to ascertain the truth of Brahman, the consciousness, the universe, the cosmos. So the highest level of inquiry which is humanly possible is in the realm of beyond the human conscience. So if we have that kind of a science of debate available in our texts, it's really our fault, I would say. If not, it's not a misfortune, it's our own fault, because at an individual level, the traditions have been preserved. And people who with dharmic views have definitely struggled to actually bring it into public spaces. I mean, yesterday in the inaugural session, we heard Nomeshji's own challenges in bringing this event into this premises. So, I mean, and I completely see that, sir. I mean, I've been practicing in Delhi and especially in the Supreme Court exclusively from 99, and the change in the corridors is now visible. I mean, Vikramjit ji or me would be the lone voices who would actually question in the corridors a view which we do not agree with our value systems. But that was the dominant politically patronized views. So, it's these lone battles which have actually led to a change which has now led to opening up of campuses for an Indic perspective and an Indic engagement. I mean, it's a privilege that I happen to be in the third of such event in the short span of probably 8 weeks. Different universities, one in the west, Ahmedabad, one in Shastra in south, now in Delhi. I mean, I think the Indic knowledge system is actually vibrant and resonating. And then the collaboration is probably what is the need of the hour. And thank you very much, Nomeshji, for actually creating this platform to connect with experts in their domains and then have a modern, trained, westernized people who refuse to be westernized internally. So probably Vikramjit ji or me, we never accepted it. We took it as one possible view, like a Charvaka view, and not really hate it. So therefore, a Western view is a Charvaka view for us, and we accept it as an inclusive part of our ecosystem. Now, when you have an inclusive approach, there is no conflict. I can see that there is a place in every society across the board where there is space for engagement, an intellectual engagement without rhetoric and without demeaning or undermining each other's perspectives, with respect and deference, which an intellectual engagement should normally have. So I think truth and justice and fraternity, if you take these three phrases used in our preamble, which actually are the guiding principles on which the Constitution has been interpreted, and expanding horizons of Article 14, 19 and 21 have resulted in the citizens' rights being actually expanded. Though the original conception was actually a hybrid conception, it was a synthesis of a Western worldview, probably from the Enlightenment ideals, with a chassis of Indic value system. Now, let's not disown the Indic value system foundation of a constitution, because what are the choices you have? I mean, the communists always wanted a revolution to overthrow the existing constitutional democracies and then bring in a revolution. And we've seen where an established constitution is removed, the new ones are not accepted, because once a society moves into the zone of revolution, so we become Afghanistan. One tribal dominates for a while, and the next tribal comes in, and then probably a civilized tribal comes and bombs them out, and then hands over them more weapons and then walks away. So, I mean, I think we are seeing tribal wars happening everywhere. So, I think as a civilizational state, our approach should be more intellectually driven, and then more logical and smart, because ultimately we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So if you are trying to spread a word of harmony through an interpretative mechanism, I think that will be accepted. And yesterday we heard that the world is now looking for an alternate model. And definitely they are looking up to India in different forms. Be it your vaccine Maitri, where India's credence as a humanitarian state is definitely a reflection of our humanitarian values of a civilization. So therefore, I think we reached out to people in need without actually asking them to mortgage their sovereign assets, to give them the core medication or the support systems those nations needed. And they will be remembered for generations, that people have come and helped us in our hour of need. And that's the human core value beyond our borders as well, because that's something which, from an Advaitic philosophy perspective, they could be the part of the same Brahma, and then they are all Atmas for us. For us, all species, 84 lakh yonis, are all species which are a part of the journey of the human soul. So if you look at it from that point of view, they are all part of the larger system which we only acknowledge. No other world perspective acknowledges their existence, either horizontally or vertically. I mean, if you look at the human species horizontally, across races, we recognize good and bad in the race. Like, we have a Dhruva, you have a Prahalada coming from Rakshasa races. And then if you look at it, they were all worshippers of Shiva. So they were not people who are non-believers in that sense. So therefore, I think if we can actually transcend our binary perspective, which I think is accepting of the Abrahamic worldview of us versus others, then I think we actually bring out a broader Indic worldview of inclusiveness. And then the measure is not necessarily a wealth measure or an army or a armed strength or a valor measure, but a cumulative of all those measures with an underlying dharmic perspective of Satya and Dharma being the guiding lights of our civilization. Now, when I say Dharma and Satya are civilizational headlights for this journey, the constitutional framers have given a lot of mottos to various institutions. Now, I think most of us are aware these mottos are originating from Indic texts. So now, what happens to those seeds that they have sown? I mean, they are very evidently visible to us. If you just look at any major old national institution, all of them have some phrases in Sanskrit. True. Their mottos are all in Sanskrit. I think our endeavor probably as an Indic knowledge probably ecosystem could be probably to highlight the virtues which were expected of those institutions from its origins, wherever the sloka is there. What was the context in which the sloka has come about, and how that becomes relevant for that specific institution. See, now as Srinivas had explained, there are personal purusharthas and there are samajika arthas that we have to be achieved. So therefore, moksha is not a community thing that we are going to achieve. We do not have a judgment day for the community till all rise from the graves. Right? It's an individual pursuit for us. So therefore, the individual makes the collective as far as we are concerned. So in that sense, in that spirit, if you look at it, the dharma and satya being driving forces of our judiciary. Now, I mean, this is something I discovered or I learned from Sri Parasranji. He pointed it out, and then I've shared it with many other lawyers and nobody noticed it. The motto of the High Court is Satyameva Jayate. So now, if you think about it from a jurisprudential perspective, the High Courts typically are the final courts to adjudicate the questions of fact in appeals, wherever they are in the appeal. They sometimes exercise a revisional jurisdiction also, but primarily in the hierarchy of courts, the ascertainment of factual truth or otherwise ends with the High Courts. So now when you look at Satyameva Jayate, so the truth is to be deciphered at that stage. And then the matters travel to the Supreme Court. Now whether truth alone is enough or there should be dharma. So now what is the motto of Supreme Court? When you look at it, Yato dharmas tato jaya. And this is exactly what Gandhari actually blesses Duryodhana with when he seeks her blessing before the war. And this phrase, in fact, in my reading, I noticed that comes around 11 times in the Mahabharata. So it comes 11 times in the Mahabharata. And then, I mean, that's a future project. I want to write about that. All 11. I've referred to that in one book. So now, what are we looking at? So therefore, these seats were there. Why are we disowning them? And if you look at it from an inclusive perspective, international relations also, Rama goes to Ravana's Lanka, conquers him, kills him. He could have just made it a vassal state. Could have stayed back and ruled. He said, Janani Janma Bhumischa Sargadapi Kariyasi. He says that, no, sorry, that is not my intent. Please, you have your ruler. Probably that's how the international bodies, League of Nations, United Nations, wanted to. But they didn't have the conceptual depth which we can only provide. It's as simple as that. I mean, as I see it, probably to refuse the neighboring states who wanted to join the Union of India was a very Abrahamic approach, us and others. If they were culturally integrated, the body of the geographical entity that we all recognize as Bharatavarsha, including the Akhanda Bharata or the cultural Bharata as we see, is now different nation states in different parts. The geographical separation has not really helped them achieve what they sought to achieve, which is evident. As a matter of fact, if you look at Pakistan or Bangladesh or probably Afghanistan, their plight is there to be seen. Now what happens to Nepal? The only Hindu state after the revolution is nowhere. They're finally looking back to actually bring back the king. That's being in the contemplation. Now what does it tell us? It tells us that probably a revolutionary throwing away of what we have could actually lead us to something more disastrous than where we are. I would rather believe, I think that's a political strategy also we've seen in the public discourse, which people keep complaining you're appropriating our icons. Sardar Patel is ours. He's a great freedom fighter. Now why does anyone have a monopoly on his legacy? Right? Let every one of us celebrate it. Isn't it? In that sense of inclusiveness, suddenly they get alienated within the corners where they were tried to be kept as their own private entities with an internal hierarchy to keep them behind. So for us, that's not the approach at all, I think. I mean, from a Bharatiya Drishti, if you look at the legal system also, the challenges that we face every day in a court of law are very immense. There was a case which I happened to handle where the publishers were publishing the essence of Ramayana and Mahabharata, the moral conducts and the values. They were getting the income tax benefits for the donors to that, ATG, etc. The issue was fought on a principle. A gentleman who claims to be a scholar himself, a principal commissioner, writes whatever he chooses to, criticizing Ramayana and Mahabharata, and then refuses the ATG. So that had to be challenged. The High Court also was not inclined to accept that they were part of a cultural heritage. So because they look at them as religious texts. Right? And then the matter was carried to the Supreme Court also. But unfortunately, here the court said that we know what you're saying, but no, we can't really get into that. Because the court was very, very diffident to actually get into the space to engage on certain itihasas which are internationally acknowledged to be part of cultural heritage. That's the state of our affairs. The Indian courts are diffident to acknowledge our own cultural heritage, which is acknowledged by other theocratic nations which have chosen to follow a different faith but accept Ramayana or Mahabharata as a part of the cultural heritage. So I think our endeavor was definitely not successful in that proceedings. But the research that I did at that point of time led me to a lot of international conventions which talk about cultural heritage and things like Rahulji was mentioning, the UNESCO sites, etc. Now they are trying to actually propagate or establish their hegemony on our minds by defining it. The reason I requested Srinivas is to give the definition clauses, otherwise we'll be caught in a Webster expression of the English expression he gives. And then we'll be again into the loop. Because that's the challenge that probably most of us face. I mean, I'm not literate in Sanskrit. I can read Devanagari and I pronounce it in Telugu and I make fix because I understand the bhava behind it, which is, I think, intuitive. Because you can't teach the bhava. It's quite intuitive. It probably comes with whatever samskaras that we get at home or in the society. In that level, if you look at the challenge that we face in courts, I mean, I'm trying to share my experiences of the Indic issues and the courts. Now, if we look at the Ram Janmabhoomi case, Vikramjit ji was part of the Allahabad High Court team which actually built the foundation for the Supreme Court to lead the judgment. In Supreme Court, he was very much there with us, but because of his office, he had his constraints. There again, it was a challenge to prove an axiom. I mean, for all of us, Ram born in Ayodhya is an axiom. Sun rises in east. And the earth is, in egg-shaped. That's probably what our descriptions were. So, if you have a worldview which says the earth is flat and still wants to fight you, the burden is always on us to prove, because we are scientific. We were always scientific. So now I think merely because the other's standpoint is earth is flat and then we would like to define everything else with that edifice, you'll reach nowhere. Not by engaging them at their level, we would go anywhere. So the ideal approach would be to include perspectives, and then that's exactly how probably the Ram Janmabhoomi case was won. At the trial, Allahabad High Court stage, we did what is required in their system. We fought the battle on their terms, on their turf, in their jurisprudence, and still won it. Satyameva jayate. Yato dharmas tato jayaha. We've established that in a court of law. So now, what is it that was expected of us to be proved? We had to prove that a place is there, which is the place of birth. And that Ayodhya is the city, which is the place of birth. And the current Ayodhya in Faizabad district, the then Faizabad district, was the Ayodhya we are referring to. And that is the same place which is part of the Bharatavarsha referred to in the Valmiki Ramayana. That was the exercise. So as God had its own role to play in this case, and we experienced that at every stage. I'm sure Vikramjit ji would also have experienced in Allahabad as much as we've experienced in Supreme Court. Some good sense prevailed and they said, no, we are not disputing that this Ayodhya is the Ayodhya or Ram was born in Ayodhya. We are only saying Ram was not born in this place. So therefore the battle actually got reduced to for about less than 1500 square yards. That's it. The battle is about 1500 square yards of land. Now everything around it was to maintain law and order. The state and the central government started acquiring. So eventually we got it back with, as they would call it, compound interest. The entire land. Isn't it? If you look at it. And so, I mean, the patient, persistent, the contest that we maintained. I mean, I need to share this. I mean, when this matter was about to start, I mean, we were having a preparatory conferences, etc. And Parasaran sir was leading this battle, completely in charge. And one ground rule he had, probably he's seen enough of these battles and he understands the other side more than anybody else with his Indic wisdom and intuition. He said, we will fight this battle on only such terms in the court which Ram would approve. So he set that standards for us inside the courtroom. And then the second thing he knew was, I mean, this was a battle, in fact, I've said this earlier also, was a battle where they were avoiding to go into a final judgment. They were avoiding the judgment day, as they always do. Because, I mean, we don't fear a judgment day because we know our karma is going to carry us any lives, any number of lives. So there's no judgment day for us. So we were okay with going through the karma of doing the proceedings and be part of the process. So the provocations which are there in the courtroom, the sniding, probably the Australian level of sledging, which was happening, I mean, to everyone. I mean, including Parasaran sir. There were no exceptions made. So they fought it with full vigor. And then we adopted our strategy, and then it was Parasaran sir who probably did not choose to play outside the off stick. That's it. And tire them out. So that's what legends are made of. Not to give in to the temptation of playing into their areas. So, I mean, and he would say, no, we are not going to respond to these taunts. And in fact, in the rejoinder argument, when he was in a flow, the other side just got up into a flare, a fit of rage, shouting, yelling and all. And then that's theatrics in court, which is done when you notice. And we know it when some counsel in his flow. I think then, boss, this guy is going to take it through home run. So then you try to disrupt. So that's exactly what was being played out in court. Sir sat down, I mean, at 92, and he got up. And the first thing he said, my lords, I know why they've done this. I've not forgotten what I was arguing, and I start from where I left. And finished the entire exercise. And then actually labeled it as an endeavor to distract. At his age, that the chances of he coming back to the point would have been difficult with a very difficult memory and other challenges at that age. That's the wisdom, and that's probably how these battles actually are won, purely on Dharmic principles. So I think if you look at it from this point of view, I think we need to own it up, because for us there is no other. There is no para, sab, advaita. So it's only a matter of realization. So until you realize that it's all one, you will have your positions. And then the biggest demons or the Rakshasa also were in eagerness to come back to Vishnu. That they did take those evil forms, isn't it? Instead of having a longer distance to come back as bhaktas, they chose the evil route. So, absolutely. So therefore, that's the philosophy. Now, if you look at it, ISIS or Taliban or Al Qaeda probably are following that path, and we'll deal with them appropriately. But intellectually also, if you look at it, I mean, I was referring to my old articles because I realized in the digital age, you can't keep changing your versions easily. You will be caught and labeled. So I keep refreshing my own perspective. So my understanding of the Indic civilization being inclusive. Now let me explain the other worldview that we are talking about. The Western worldview has all been on a premise of an Abrahamic foundation of us versus others, the blue blood versus the others, the royal versus the non-royals. So this binary worldview had led to multiple faiths emerging out of the Abrahamic cult or tradition, and then including their version of the Charvaka, namely the Marxism. So if you look at it, their version of the Charvakas are the Marxist atheists. So they brought in the liberty or equality and all those labels, but what exactly have they executed on ground? We see what has happened, right? And so therefore, that othering is something, is a template. I think as soon as we recognize that template and not play into it, I think our battle is won. As long as you're playing within their template, you cannot beat it. Yesterday, as we were talking about, if you're looking at the constitution from within the framework of the constitution, then you can never get out of the constitution. But if I look at it from a Bharati perspective and keep it open-ended and interpret every part of the constitution the way I want to interpret it, and I have a judge who aligns to that view, will be the judgment of the day. And the judgment is final until it is reviewed or again relook happens on it in some other proceedings. So therefore there is no finality. The seeking of truth is a continuous process. So though for the parties the judgment could be final, but on a principle it can always be reviewed, isn't it? I mean, so therefore the 14 years of Vanavasa of Pandavas, for 14 years definitely was a Vanavasa. But that also comes to end, because for us, time is cyclical, with internal cycles. We are not in a linear mode. So when you're not in a linear mode, then there's always an up and there's always a down. I mean, I could experience that we have turned that civilizational cycle upward, because with the judgment on 19 November 2019, the civilizational awakening which happened, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm completely new into this space. I mean, personally, yes, I was there reading Ramayana and Mahabharata at a personal level, but at the larger social or a public space, it was completely, I mean, I was new. With this case, I got introduced into that space. And then I started observing things, and probably the insights of reading Ramayana and Mahabharata helps me understand the world much better. There I saw that there's some kind of a latent thing which has actually emerged to the surface, which we didn't know existed. Even in those 40 days in the court corridors, when we had been in the courts for this case exclusively Monday through Friday, every day, I mean, it was very intense. But the warmth we were getting from acquaintances and including strangers who just come and pat on your back, I was surprised. I always thought we were just doing a professional job. But the amplitude of that effort was actually resonating way far beyond that. And the kind of phone calls which were received on the day of the judgment, the kind of resonance it had across the world, the celebrations across the world, that definitely tells us something, that there is a civilizational wrong which stood corrected that day. So that wrong has not been forgotten at the bottom of the heart, and that has remained from generation to generation. Why would people connect emotionally towards a place which they have not even seen in their lives? Probably they have not visited it, and they don't know anything about it. Right? Like people like me, I'm a missionary school educated Hyderabadi, completely divorced any political backgrounds. I mean, suddenly when you get into this and you start reading, then you realize there's something more. And that resonance which it brought, I mean, I was in the Kumbh the last week also. I was telling my daughter, in fact, she wanted to go for the Mahakumbh. I mean, she had her own materialistic reasons. Number achhe aayenge. I mean, I think that's how we all are trained to relate to God to begin with. For me, Saturday chana milega sham ko, Sunday morning pulihora milega prasad. So that was my go-to for the temple. I mean, so you need a reason to go to the temple. Then you climb the ladder of the spiritual path. We can't shed that at that entry level and say, oh, he goes for chana, so you're not fit to go to temple. Sorry, no. You should encourage them to go, whichever form. Because you never know when it triggers. बौद्ध से तो कब आएगा, किस पेड़ के नीचे आएगा, पता नहीं है ना? We should keep it open. Right? In that spirit, if you explore, we don't know who gets triggered or when this moment occurs. So we need to create that environment, and the environment should be positive and inclusive, so that we are not becoming a mirror image or a very bad replica of the Abrahamic hate. I think that is what is dominating the public space. So if you bring in this inclusive approach and you say, yes, of course, we have so many Pitadipadis, we have so many Shankaracharyas, we have so many people. Your version is one amongst them. I may not relate to it, I may not agree with it, but I will not dismiss it as not right. I will respect it, because for me, Bhagavad Gita is the final word, that whatever path you do it sincerely, it takes you to the Supreme. I think if we have this philosophical foundation, I think, and probably the battle is half won already as to how we interpret our texts. Now, coming to the legal thing, I mean, the biggest challenge that I face, I still face, is not being exposed to the correct methods of debate. None of the law schools, and I spoke to Parasuran sir also, so he's born in 1926, 27. So from his generation, they never taught Latin, but Latin maxims are known to all. But they don't teach Sanskrit, but we don't know Sanskrit maxims. Just look at the irony. So what exactly is the reason? That in my book, Maxims from Mahabharata, that triggered my thought of actually compiling Indian maxims. I've published, thanks to Indica, Maxims from Mahabharata in 2022. So where I talk about the story behind the book, saying that the belligerence of a litigator, that I don't need to know the subject, boss. If I get the right people, I can present it in a form which becomes palatable. That's like we are in a form doing sales and marketing, in a way of saying. So what I thought was, like, why are we using these Latin maxims? And I've experienced certain elite law school students talk about these maxims, and they talk about the Western jurisprudence. I'm illiterate, I'm sorry. Most of the Western jurists which are being discussed, I've never read them. I'm a BCom honors student, was happy to make money making some commercial matters. So therefore, I'm not familiar with any of those philosophies, and probably I suddenly feel that's my strength. I'm unpolluted by any of their worldviews. And my foundation has been in Indian jurisprudence, because I chose to read Ramayana and Mahabharata to have a jurisprudential foundation. And this journey started, I think, 15 years after enrollment, to understand, because I hit what I would refer to as a glass ceiling intellectually, but there was nothing growth happening at the intellectual space. So then I really felt the need for a jurisprudential foundation. So I thought maybe I should also go to Harvard, because that is the place to go. And I'm grateful I didn't go there, because by then it was something else. So then I started reading Ramayana and Mahabharata, with probably the privilege of having access to Parasuran sir inspired me quite a bit. So started reading Ramayana and then Mahabharata. Then I knew for some intuitive reason that Shanti Parva is where I'm going to get my jurisprudence. But I realized that I can't jump into Shanti Parva. That's what we do before the exam, buy the question bank and finish it. I wanted to learn. So I started reading the whole text. So there I laid my foundation for jurisprudence. And then when I look at it, now any other proposition which comes, I challenge my young colleagues who are good in this Western logic and jurisprudence. And I said, boss, I'll give you the Indian source for it, which will be few hundred or 1,000 years before you. So not that we are questioning their originality, because human intuition or human ideas are universal. They are there in the air. anyone who's actually attentive towards, he's actually doing a tapasya, and he will have the shruti of that. So that's darshana of that, if you can call it. So that's exactly what happens. Then you get that thought, and then you amplify it and then develop it. So if you can look at it from that perspective also, I think there is a generation which is eager for content, but there is no content. Very, very unfortunate reality. At my age, I've turned 15 last year. There's no content. In fact, I started this journey of exploring Indians' knowledge systems when the Bharati Vidya Bhavan started their weekend courses. So I've attended these courses in KG Mark for about 2 years. And then COVID hit, then they had their online courses also. I continued. And I really enjoyed going to those diploma courses because I knew that I'm not going to write the exam. I'm a very classic lawyer who's not good in writing exams or passing exams. So yesterday when I was entering the IIT, I was really having my collars up. I think I'm the only one from my class in school who's entered an IIT in his own right, not as a visitor. Thank you, Professor. I'm sure you wouldn't have known this. So, and it's a great privilege. My children laugh. What are you doing in IIT? Because I couldn't help them with their 6th or 7th class maths also. Forget physics. So, that's what it tells me, that probably that may not be my path. But if I identify my path and do what I enjoy doing, it still brings you to the IIT. So if you have to use it metaphorically as a benchmark to be achieved. So looking at that perspective, when I look at our jurisprudence, there is isolated pockets of work. But unfortunately, the law schools are completely in the control of a worldview which is very Abrahamic. They are racist. And I use the phrase racism. There is language racism which has been perpetuated at the state level in our country post-independence, qua Sanskrit and its literature in Sanskrit. It's been only open to Westerners who actually explored and published and told us what our mother is. Whereas it was very contrary to our own experience of our mother. Correct? So, when I said mother, I treat Sanskrit as grandmother because my mother tongue is Telugu. So I took that liberty. Ki galti hoga to nani is generally liberal as compared to dadi. So I said I can take those liberties. But the idea is that we have disconnected from the roots to learn Sanskrit. I tried to encourage my children to get into Sanskrit, but the ecosystem is so against it. I can't have them isolated from that. So they were not keen on pursuing it. So now Sanskrit has become a subject, and then IKS is also becoming a moral science class which is optional. इसमें कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा, degree तो मिलेगा. So I think we need to change that approach, and we need to bring back Ramayana and Mahabharata as our cultural itihasas from the perspective of references to multiple things that they actually teach you or talk about in the subtext. Now, if you look at Ramayana, the description of flora and fauna should be part of your biology or zoology classes. Why are we not having the geography classes? Right? You need to have that template and say, ye yahan pe hua hai. And we need to write our textbooks with references to that in a natural language of the current times. We can't really give any complex descriptive words. My thought on this is, probably you bring the gist out, and in a textbook you may not have to footnote everything, right? As long as the back-end material is available, don't footnote it. Then the seculars will clear it. The moment you footnote it, they'll have a problem. Isn't it? So I think that's the approach, because they have a problem which is unfortunately a very colonial Abrahamic worldview of othering anything which is embedded in Indic civilization. See, we are not trying to say that this is the only way. We are saying this also deserves its due place with as much rigor as any other branch of law or science or scientific developments have. And I think we need to have deference. Fortunately, we are at the head of various departments. Now you find scientists who believe in actually a lot of our Sanatan values or practices. So that has set a tone for the generation now. I think it's time that the textbooks are also taken care of at all levels, including the professional courses. I think that's where I'm trying to do my bit, and then I keep looking forward to Srinivas ji to teach me something. And we are actually in the process of trying to engage and then collaborate and bring out textbook. I mean, somebody has to do it, if so be it, if I have to do it. I mean, I've taken it upon myself. And then I realized here, I mean, it's a solo work. And as I realized, most of these efforts are individual efforts. These groups give you strength, but ultimately the tapasya is individual. Satsang is good. Satsang is one step behind tapasya. So this satsang should lead to individual tapasya, and I am sure each one of us would, in their respective fields, make it as contemporary and as relevant. And my challenge was that I'm trying to address teenagers at home. And if I'm able to communicate with them at their level, I think my task is achieved. And then the people who are grown up, and I can see my presence on LinkedIn is primarily to actually give an alternate perspective. I realize there's no perspective. And the Marxist perspective is defeated. And then there are no takers for it. But where is the alternate perspective? If you do not give content, something else will step in. The identity challenges crept in between. But they also receded gradually. Because ultimately we don't want any harmful tendencies to be sowed in our children or the youngsters' minds. We need to have a sustainable philosophical model where your end goal of moksha guides every step of your life in all aspects of your life, be it in your professional space or in your personal space, and there cannot be a separation of values between the two. I think that's the message that probably we need to carry in all our individual endeavors. And then the constitutional courts also are actually what Vikramji ji has just told. They will not accept the label, but they are giving everything in that content. So probably the label is irrelevant for us. We were never driven by calendars. We were only driven by the characteristics of the personalities we endure. Ramo Vigrahan Dharmaha. So we don't go by his date of birth alone. We celebrate his birthday on. But nevertheless, the characteristics are what we adulate and we seek to emulate. I think with this, I come to the end of my talk. Thank you.